Howdy, everybody. Thank you for joining us again. This is the ArcGIS Online Organizations for Schools, Part 1, where we're really trying to make sure that everybody is starting these processes well, or if you've already begun and you're operating and you want to fix a little oops, that's what this is for. All right, I get to work on the very basics, and my colleagues Kylie Donya and Tom Baker are going to walk you through some further elements. And even to begin, not everybody needs to be working inside of an ArcGIS Online organization. What a lot of people do is to say, oh, I need to jump in and get software first. I'm not sure how to spell GIS, but I need to start with getting software. No, we want to encourage people to understand what GIS is about. And this document that you can see here, esriurl.com/getting started for educators, it's really, think 25 steps from how do you spell GIS down to what do I need for lifelong learning. Numbers 1 through 10, you can do all of that with no login necessary. And many don't go beyond number 10. And it's ideal if you can explore this with a buddy. Number 11, if you were watching Laura's presentation in the last hour, getting to know GIS for secondary students, that's a wonderful thing for secondary students and teachers. So once you say, great, my students need to have this, we're going to walk you through the USA process. Again, the Orgs for Schools doc is a good set of information. That's step 13 in the getting started. But finally, you get to step 14, requesting software, or you just say, hey, this is where I want to go. I saw it in the movie. Go to esri.com/schools, hit the pull down, and go to the schools mapping software bundle. We're going to ask you 2 questions here. Are you sure you want a school bundle, or is it a GIS club kit? And sometimes it's one, sometimes the other. You get to make that decision. And then, does your school already have a school site license? There's a map that you can see linked from there, and go see that. But you do need to be an employee to fill out the form, and it does take several days. And if you have filled out the form, just keep watch on your spam filters, because sometimes these things get caught in school spam filters. Hey, I got my organization email. This is the thing that we're all really excited to see. Great, I want to get started. Well, just make sure that you're paying attention to some of the guidance that is in this Orgs for Schools document, esriurl.com/AGO Orgs for Schools, because page 24 will get you exactly into the launching steps, but all of the preface information is very valuable, and the following information is very valuable for how do you do this, work with it successfully. Make sure that you have some writing tools or a camera to record the information. And then if you've got a buddy, that's the best way to do this. Go through it with a buddy together. It's a 3-step process to launch. You're going to click on the link and go in and make a new username to create the launching admin. This is like the chicken comes first. You got to make the chicken, and then you can set up the organization. 2 things: the long name. That's what is it called, and what's the name on the title on the front page? The Mercator School of California or something like that. And you can change this one as you need to. Then there's the short name, and that's the part that is the URL. That needs to be unique in the entire universe. You can change it, but it's best to know what you want to call it right away at the start. You've activated your org. Wonderful. Now what? Make sure that you add a partner admin at some point. Ideal now, and that you can work with your partner. And then that you also add a dummy student login so that you can use this for some testing and comparison. So give it a username, and something that we recommend is use that org prefix as the last part of the username. Give it a creator user type and a role that is user. Use the admin's emails, activate that, and then go ahead and create a map, save it, and see if you can see it from the admin side or from the public side. Because what we want you then to do is for you to pay attention to these organization settings. And this is where you need to go through this pretty carefully and understand what it is that you're looking at. There are half a dozen things that you're going to be setting up. First, how do you get where I am in this drawing or this graphic? After you've logged in, you can see that I'm logged in here. I go to number 1, that's the organization. I hit settings. Okay, I'm an admin and I get to see the settings. We're going to take a look at the general, the map, the member roles, the new member defaults, credits, and security. All this stuff these are big things here, especially the security one. Now in the general, and again, that's organization, settings, general. This is where you can change your name, you can set up your contact link, you can create some organizational defaults that are useful. And then this is where you can set up your URL or reset it if you need to. Again, best to do that early on before you have a lot of content in there. And last, to make sure that you've got your administrative setup there. The map, what you get to do that is important at the very top is you get to decide what's your default map. Is it the classic map viewer or the new map viewer? And then there are some defaults that you can set up down below. These things you can come back and do. It's just important to make sure that you know about them, especially with roles. This is where you can set up your roles. Notice that there are some default roles and you can create some custom roles. If you decide to create a role, that gives you this column over here on the right-hand side where you can start from an existing role, import all of those permissions, and then modify them as you like. Now, Kylie and Tom are going to take you through some of these things. I'm just trying to get you to see this is what you need to pay attention to as an admin. You don't need to have everything perfect right away. You do want to come back and revisit this as you understand more and come back, iterate your way through it. The new member defaults, you may not quite grasp right away. I think this one is a little bit harder to understand, but you can work your way through it, and Kylie and Tom are going to help you with that. Same thing with credits. You will want to set up that you have the allocation enabled so that you don't have somebody consuming all of the credits accidentally, and that people get to see how many things that they have. But the big thing within this is security. We want to spend more time on this because we don't want people to be sharing personally identifiable information in the organization and especially beyond the organization. So these elements in the security zone, and it's about anonymous use and displaying a sign-in panel and editing their biographical information, and members can share content publicly. There's probably no reason for that. You don't want to have student information out there online. And work in here with the logins. This is where you're going to be setting these things up. Now, Tom and Kylie are going to be taking you through this, but the security is a big deal. And that's why we want people to pay attention to this. So I'm going to turn it over at this point to Tom and Kylie, who are going to take you through some keys.
Great, thanks, Charlie. All right, so Charlie gave a great overview just now of the things we have to be thinking about when we get our when we get our org, or when we notice we need to make it run a little bit smoother and maybe we skip some of the pages in the org stock and need to go back and get everything in line. Now, what Tom and I want to do is take 7 of these things that Charlie has touched on many of, but we want to give you a little bit more detail so you know where to go with these. All right, okay. Jump to the next slide. Thank you. So the first is that process of creating your student and teacher accounts. So one of the main reasons people get an org is that they want students able to log in, right? This is one of the best ways to get your minors accounts, because they can have an identity, they can have content, they can have a house and work in it. Now, to do that, you as the admin are going to have to set up those accounts. So you can just create these however you want, ad hoc, right? Click new member, give them a name, give them some info, maybe use special roles or defaults, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. But you don't want to have to do that for too many people, because you're going to have to type in all this information one at a time. Now, I know Charlie has already said this, but we really want to nail the point that there is no student personal info in here. We don't want names. We don't want emails. We don't want student IDs that might have part of a name in it, right? It's just better to leave that out. It doesn't add value to what you're sharing, and it can make some parents and administrators pretty uncomfortable. So one of our recommendations is use your own email address as the email. That's really only used if they need to reset the password. Yep, so I see the question coming in. If the student forgets their password, ask the teacher to recreate it. Yep, that's why your teacher email is going to be associated with the account. And that way the teacher can help the student do those things. Now, if you don't want to have to type in all this information one at a time, you can actually generate a CSV. And you can see an image of a snapshot of one here to create these accounts. In it, you'll put the email that you want associated with the account. You'll include a first name and last name. Now, we recommend something really generic, again, avoiding that personal information. And here you can see we've used student 0001, student 0002, right? And then their last name is that start of your URL for your org. So this does need to be unique, and that will help it be unique. Give it a generic password. We're going to give it a type and a role. We'll go over those in a little bit. But the key here is that you can make this spreadsheet of student and teacher account information. And that way you can even use Excel formulas to generate this spreadsheet and just upload it and spin up all these accounts. All right, next one. Let's go to number 2.
So at some point, most organizations will grow to the level where it may not make sense anymore to use ad hoc user creation or even use a spreadsheet, a CSV. In these cases, we recommend you take a look at something called single sign-on. Now, single sign-on is pretty common around the web these days. In fact, you probably use it on other sites and may not even realize it. But when you use a third party to authenticate yourself or a user in a system, that's oftentimes a single sign-on. With ArcGIS Online, we allow for the integration of some very common single sign-on platforms like Microsoft Azure, Google Classroom, Rapid Identity, ClassLink, and others. Any system that is what is called SAML2 compliant can typically talk to ArcGIS Online. This is pretty technical stuff. This actually requires a district technology staff person to plug these two systems together. The really cool thing about this, though, is that you as a classroom teacher don't have to worry about creating student accounts, passwords being lost or forgotten, or necessarily even things like sharing and software access, because a lot of that can be tied to user account inside of the single sign-on. Now, interesting things about single sign-on. The district can strictly control what data is passed into ArcGIS Online. So if your district or state are particularly keen on certain aspects of student personally identifiable information, single sign-on is hands down the best way to move forward. It gives you complete control over the data that Esri can see inside of its system about your kids in terms of user accounts. One of the other really cool things about single sign-on is that if set up properly, student and teacher accounts can automatically be generated when the student clicks through the links inside of the dashboard or the console that students would typically have access to as a part of your district's computing system. So ArcGIS Online in that way becomes very integrated. So for example, if every student in your school needed access to ArcGIS Online, or better, every student in the district wanted access to ArcGIS Online, single sign-on is definitely the way to go. You'll notice that we've got a couple bullet points here on the page that help outline some of these. The very last bullet point describes a blog where we outline not only the benefits of using single sign-on, but also some of the protocols for actually establishing or setting it up. That link at the bottom of the page is probably the one you should consider sharing to your district technology staff, and give your tech staff some time. It may take days, weeks, maybe even in large districts, months to get this set up. It's not necessarily a complicated process, but it is one that requires system integration, so it has to be done carefully. All right, Kylie?
All right, thanks, Tom. So another part of getting your users set up is licenses. So when we talk about licenses, what we're really talking about in the context of ArcGIS Online is what software that every user is allowed to use. So one of the main ones that people often want access to is ArcGIS Pro. And in the case of ArcGIS Pro, that's actually going to come not as an add-on license, as you can see in the screenshot here, but that's going to come from the user type. So what that means is when you get your school bundle, you'll have one and possibly two user types. There'll be creator, and then some groups will also have GIS Professional Advanced. Now, basically everyone except elementary schools gets those automatically. And if you need them, just work with us and we can help you out. But what GIS Professional Advanced does is it takes everything a creator can do and adds in Pro. So if you need Pro, use GIS Professional Advanced as your user type. Now, the other kind of licenses you might need are things like Community Analyst or Drone to Map. And these are things that you can add on. So you will go in here in this dialog you're seeing in this organization area, click into the licenses, and under add-in licenses, you'll be able to select the things that that user needs. Now, just remember these licenses do have to be assigned. And the other catch is if you do need to delete a user, you do need to free up those licenses before you can delete. Now, you'll get warnings and reminders about that when you are taking those steps. All right, on to number 4.
So I suppose I'm a little nerdy, but member roles to me are one of the coolest features inside of ArcGIS Online because it makes managing large numbers of students or teachers relatively easy. So Charlie touched on this earlier, but the basic role of a user, at least in basic role of a member role, at least in K-12 organizations, is to help manage what a user can do. And for a lot of students and teachers, this translates into things like sharing, being able to publish certain types of data, having access to certain features. So roles are very powerful for a lot of reasons inside of an organization. One thing I would strongly encourage you all to consider doing, and a lot of K-12 organization managers don't do, is create custom roles. And again, Charlie alluded to this, but you can use an existing role such as the publisher role and modify it, making a new student role or a custom role that can be applied to all of your students. The advantage of this is that with one-click modification to that custom student role, either when you first create it or say 6 months down the road, if you want to enable or disable one particular type or a feature, it can be done through this roles panel. We strongly encourage you to consider creating custom roles both for your students, and then maybe there's multiple types of custom roles, perhaps something for elementary and something for middle and high school students, but also create a custom role for your educators. Odds are your educators are going to need to have at least slightly elevated privileges over your students. For example, you may be okay letting your teachers publish out onto the public web, publish to everyone, whereas you may not want students, at least without a teacher intervention, publishing out onto the open web. So students may only be able to publish to their organization. Kylie's going to touch a bit more on that in a few minutes. But remember, the real power of roles is that ability to bulk modify settings and permissions 6 months, 12 months, even 3 years down the road. So it's a very powerful tool for organizing the capacities of the user inside of your organization. Kylie?
Thanks, Tom. All right, Tom really likes that last one, but I really like the sharing in our orgs because I'm kind of a neat freak. So I have a geek side, but I also really like to keep things clean. And sharing is a great way to do that. So in our system, there's a couple different ways you can share. So first, let's step back a minute and think about our org. What really is an org, right? So we've talked about accounts. So there's people in an org. And those people make maps and story maps and dashboards and all data collection projects and all this cool stuff. Let's call that their content, right? So we have people and they make stuff or content. And there's this thing called groups. So what a group is it takes a group of people and a group of content and allows them to all see what each other are doing, right? It allows them to see that content between each other. So that's really cool because with sharing, I can share something publicly. I can say, hey, world, check out this thing I made. And that might be appropriate in sometimes. For example, if you entered the school's competition, you need to share your story map with everyone so that it can be judged and then it can be enjoyed when you win, right? But what if you're having your entire class do a project where they're working on an analysis on the distribution of the power plants throughout the state of California? Well, you're going to have a whole lot of layers that are very similar. They're not going to be as useful for everyone, right? So sharing that publicly with everyone, it's not going to help many people. So instead, think about the smallest group you can share with to keep it neat. So in the case of that project in California, maybe you want to have a group for your class where everyone can share their work with each other, and maybe they need to want to compare their answers. Maybe you only want them working with you. And so you're going to create a group for you and your student, or you as an admin actually get special permissions and can see stuff in other ways. But don't just broadcast it to everyone. Maybe it's something your school's doing in a school project. You can also share at your organization level, right? So you can choose everyone public. That means no matter who has the URL, they click on it, it works. Organization, that means anyone who's signed in and a member of your same organization or school, they can all see that content. Or groups where you're choosing what people. And one of the cool things with a group, excuse me, is it could actually be people from another school as well as your school. So maybe you're collaborating across a couple schools in your district. Well, that's possible by group setup. But here's the thing. You just got to keep on top of this, right? You got to look at the content, choose how to share it, and then think about how long it needs to be shared. I'm going to have to say it again. Personal information is going to come into play here too, right? Because you're sharing, other people can see it. What's in the description? What's in the summary? Sometimes kids don't get that. So you as the admin kind of need to keep an eye on it. But it's a way to work together, right? So sharing is very key because otherwise only we get to see our good work. And we want everyone to see and learn from this work. We just need to keep in mind who exactly needs to be seeing it. All right, Tom, back to you.
Thanks, Kylie. And Charlie, if you could advance our slides. You know, I started out my work in education, teaching in a middle school. And I think for that reason, in my brain, a sense of disaster planning is always in the back, at least in the back of my head. And so that's kind of where credit budgeting falls. When I think about ArcGIS Online and students using it, I'm thinking about what can go wrong and how do I plan for it, right? How do I mitigate any of those things that could potentially just be bad? One of those things that we can do is turn on credit budgeting. And credit budgeting is a piece of cake. If you have admin credentials inside of your organization, it's two switches. Really, it's only one switch. Inside of your settings, go down to credits and flip that switch to enable credit budgeting. And what that allows you to do is basically set a governor or a cap on the number of credits that anybody in your organization can spend. Now, the advantage here is that if, for example, let's say one of the students in the middle school gets a hold of an address spreadsheet with, say, let's just say 1 million addresses, and they decide to geocode those addresses, that's going to take a pretty good chunk of your credits. 1 million addresses is a lot of addresses. Or maybe they decide to run a bunch of reports, maybe hundreds even, because, you know, it looks cool. and it's generating some interesting data. Well, the trick is all those things do consume a little bit of credit at each time it's done. The more times we do it, the more credits we consume. By turning on credit budgeting, you can stop the person, whether it's a teacher or student or anybody, at a certain level of credits inside your system. If you don't know where to set your credit limit at, 100 is probably a good starting place. If the credit budgeting system has just been enabled, you can keep an eye on how quickly people are spending down credits, and then you can decide either in a one-off setting or in a bulk way whether or not you want to increase the number of credits available to the users in your system. But it's a good way to keep a process from running amok and burning thousands or even more of your credits all in one fell swoop, all probably done accidentally anyway. So turn on credit budgeting, and then you can also turn on the option so that users can see their credits when they log in into the organization. And we're going to talk a little bit more about credit budgeting when we talk about new member defaults a little bit later on. Kylie?
All right, well, let's get into it then. New member defaults, here we go. Great, so we've talked about quite a number of different topics here. And we started with talking about creating accounts, right? And part of creating that account was that spreadsheet. And in that spreadsheet, you could specify the user type and the role. And I said we'd kind of come back to that. And we have, right? We've talked about roles. We've talked about some licensing. You get to choose what pieces people need. You get to have groups, right? We want to make our sharing, keep our room neat. Sorry. Let me grab a quick drink of water. Tom just talked to you about credits and credit budgeting. Sorry. We also have talked about just all these different things that really bring your account to life, because you want people to have the right permissions to do the right job so that things run smoothly. Now, one of the great things about new member defaults is what it lets you do is it lets you take the most common set of those that you use throughout your org. Now, often for schools, that's going to be the student, because that's probably the kind of account you end up having to create the most. And you set it up as a bundle so that when you create a new student account, it starts with the correct user type, the correct role, the correct set of licenses. It can even already be a member of some groups and have a credit budget set. What that does is it saves you having to do these 7 things that Tom and I just talked about, or I guess 6 before we got here. It saves you having to do all of those for each of these new users that you spin up. You can kind of package it all together so that that new user can get spun up and have all these set already. Another thing you can include here is Esri access. For those of you who are at the plenary, you heard Laura actually talk about this a little bit. She mentioned it, that's one of the things that lets you know if you can access the training site or not. It's more an adult thing. So for a school org, if you are thinking of a student case, you probably want that off. Now, if you find you do need to give access to teachers, you can have it on and set that afterwards, but you may want it off in your default, or maybe you create mostly teacher accounts, in which case maybe it's on in your defaults. So new member defaults are something you can set and you can configure based on the needs of your organization, and they're a starting point. They aren't set in stone. Just like all of these things that Tom and I have covered, you can go back and change them and evaluate them later. Most of the things Charlie talked about at the beginning were all things that you could go back to, reevaluate, and set again. But it's great if you can start off having to change as few things as possible, right? We're all busy enough. We don't need to add extra buttons that we need to click or have more things that we need to dive into just because we missed a button. So this is a way to not miss anything and have it set up the best way from the beginning. All right, so with that, I'm actually going to bring Charlie back up here. Charlie, Tom, let's all get off mute. Anything
Oh, yay.
You guys want to add in here? Yeah.
Actually, there's a wonderful question that just came in from Judy Bach in Illinois that was asking about, hey, this seems complicated. If we're working on a workshop, can we just get people to get their organization and get started and not have to build a whole big infrastructure to have all of the students and things like that? Can we can they begin? Can they launch their org with just getting their own username taken care of? And that's it.
That's a great question. I can give my answer on that one. So, Judith, if it depends kind of what your workshop is about, right? So if part of your workshop is teaching them to be good managers, well, then they're going to need their own org if you really want them in there and playing around. Now, on the other hand, if your workshop is teaching them how to use ArcGIS, which it likely is, that's having them have temporary accounts is a great idea. The one thing you'll want to do is you want to make sure you set the stage about the fact that the content they make in that account will not easily follow them to their new account. So make sure they know this is a sandbox. It's a playground. We're going to do these trainings, take your notes, do your practice examples, and create your content. All right. And Charlie, what would you say differently there? What do you want to add in? Because I know you're ready.
That's actually a good thing. So what I want people to do is to sort of differentiate between, I want to learn how to use ArcGIS Online. I want to learn how to make some maps. And maybe I don't need to worry about logging in. I want to be able to use some things, and I may want to make something for a short term, just for 10, 15 minutes while I'm working on it. And then I don't care if I go back to it. There's a lot that people can do without being logged in. You can do all kinds of things with GeoInquiries without being logged in. It's if you want to save from day 1 to day 2, if you want to send something off to somebody that you have created, then they need to be able to see what you've saved. You need to be able to save it. You need to have a login. If that is representing what you want to do with students, great, you're going to need a school bundle. But if you don't need the school bundle to be fully constructed for students during the summertime, you don't need to go through all of the infrastructure parts before you make a single map. You can begin working with it. That's what we want people to do, is to experience this and see what these things are like. And, think of it as kicking the tires.
Great. Any other questions anyone has seen that they want to bring up? I can also take another look through here.
There was.
Wow, go for it, Tom.
Well, there was one. I've lost the owner of the question. There was a question about kind of advanced permissions attached to roles, and I think the one way we can approach that is by pasting a blog link into the chat to help kind of hone in on what some of those permissions and settings might look like for you.
Actually, let me go back up to the.
I have totally lost that in the chat thread.
Yeah, there is.
That was Mary.
Yes. Can you give a little bit more clarity on the different permissions that come with different roles? And somebody asked a really good sort of follow-up question. So roles are really about permissions? It's permissions and prohibitions, yes. And you want to clump them together. And inside the document that I try to recommend for people, the esriurl.com/AGO orgs for schools, you can see some breakdown of all of the processes and all of the different types of permissions that you can control that. Now, when you have a whole bunch, obviously there are umpteen gajillion different ways that you can configure those. But if you think of them as sort of creating and sharing and doing administrative things, okay, only the administrator side should be having some of those. Oh, wait a minute. We have a district org and we've got a bunch of teachers. Maybe we give the teachers the capacity to create some users. So there are lots of different ways that you can construct this. And so it really depends on a kind of a sophisticated level of understanding of these different permissions. What
I'll
we've done is to open up a lot of capacity for you. The good news is you've got the power. The bad news is you need to make the decision.
One thing I'll add to that, when you get your org and you're in and you look at the process of creating a role, it actually groups these permissions for you, or the privileges, in a really nice way. So the UI itself is going to help you through them. It also allows you to start with an existing role and tweak it from there to just adjust the permission that you need on it. And of course, there's documentation about the different permissions and privileges, but I find just looking at the dialogue very useful because it does divide it into things like, what are about members, what's about content, what's about sharing. So you can kind of think about what type of thing you're trying to enable or disable for the person and find the privilege that way.
Yeah, let me jump back up to the member roles.
Yes,
and this
that
is what
one.
Kylie was just talking about. So inside this organization, the K-12 organization, we've created a number of different custom roles for different special purposes that we have. And then when we need to create a new role, we give it a name, give it a description, and then start from an existing role and then modify it. And here you can see the different elements that you get to. You can spill each of these open, and there's one item here, there's 6 items here, there are 9 items here. So you can spill each of these open and decide what it is that you want people to be able to do. Generally speaking, what I recommend for people is, if you look at a publisher role, that's kind of what students want to do, except you need to sort of close off the kind of sharing pieces that lots of people get up in some concern about.
I'm going to bring up another question. I'm seeing a couple of variations on this in here of Josh started with asking, when students graduate and are finished with their accounts, can we transfer some of their work to the teacher account? And someone else chimed in, let me find the other one down here, that one thing they do is they'll move things that should be kept, like story maps, to a unique folder name for that student or project or year for long-term storage. Those are great suggestions. Dave, we're going to invite you to help present with us in the next session on the advanced, and we'll be getting into that as one of our suggestions. But for those of you asking those questions, join us in the next hour. We are going to go a little more in depth about how to manage going forward. But yeah, you can move the content within an org rather easily, just changing the owners and moving it around as you need to. And having an account where you move things to as an archive is one great way to do that. Another question coming in, Charlie, that I think you might want to speak to on here. Can I change my Ed Bundle account to a new school where I'm transferring? My old school is not going to use it. If I have to create a new Ed Bundle account for the new school, can I save and transfer my created content?
Yes and no. The best way, if you're in a school and you've got a bundle set up in a school, you're going to be going to a new school. The best way to think about what do I do with my old bundle is that's licensed to the school. It's not licensed to you. You're just the name that is attached to it. It's licensed to the school. So you don't want to move that bundle. If you want to copy some content from your archive of things into another bundle, that's a different problem. And you can do that. It with an asterisk around that, because it is a little bit challenging. But the key is the software is licensed to the school. When you say I'm signing up for a school license, the reason that you need to be an employee of the school is that you're saying yes to the people who use this license are going to be abiding by the rules. If you transfer that over to somebody else, That's not the group that has the permissions attached to them. So keep that bundle inside that school, set up a new bundle for the second place, and then think about, okay, how do I transfer content? How do I not transfer, but copy content from one org into the second? I'm going to actually show you in the next session how I get to use ArcGIS Online Assistant to copy things, some things, between one org that I'm working in and a different org. And in terms of what do we do with students that have graduated and we want to delete their content, or we want to modify, we just want to archive it. We want to put it someplace so it's out of the way. Great, go ahead and unshare it. And you may decide to delete it, but we're going to be talking about that next round as well.
And another one that goes along great with this, Pauline just chimed in, can the licensing be applied to a district rather than a school? Teachers are employees of the district, not the particular school.
Right. We get this question a lot. Hey, am I signing up for the school or the district? We ask people to go ahead and sign up if you know you're ready. We're not going to interview everybody and say, now, have you talked to the right person about whether you're the appropriate requestor? We're going to trust people to do this. We do a bit of verification when somebody submits a request for software. We verify that they are an employee of the school or the district. If the district says, we're in charge, teachers don't get to request software, that's your guys' decision to wrestle with. We'll help people if it is a teacher that wants to get software, or if it is a district that wants it. We're happy to have everybody in the district have access to it. We've got one district that has 300 schools, and they've got one license to cover everybody. We're great with that. We have another district that is 100 schools, and they've got 100 different bundles. We're great with that. However you want to set it up in your situation, we're okay with. We'll help you make some of those decisions if we need to by telling you what it means.
Yep. All right. We are almost out of time. There's another good question in here from Parker about bulk transfer of existing content to the corresponding users after enabling SSO. Does you have to do it manually? Can it be scripted? That's a great question to bring to our next session, just as a teaser. But yes, you can script and deal with those kinds of things. Remember, what Charlie was saying a minute ago is kind of the same point. It's we'll set bundles up how you want. You guys can do question. You're the admins. So you can go in and script things and move the content around. You guys can choose how things are set up. You choose if there's an archive account, and we'll help you with whichever way it's best for you guys to set it up. You guys have asked some great questions. I'm really glad you've all joined us. A lot of you are asking some very in-depth questions, showing that you've really been thinking about how to do this the right way. So I do hope you join us in the next hour as well.
And we're coming up to the end of our time here. Schools@esri.com. You can reach the three of us at any time. Go ahead and ask those questions. And if you're looking for how do I recommend, what's an address to send people, it's just esri.com/schools to get access to all kinds of information that will help people get started. All right, I think we're out of time. What a great group. I hope we see everybody in. Is this when we get to take a 30-minute break? Or do we have a 15-minute break here?
The next session begins at the top of the hour.
Top of the hour.
15.
So everybody, time to stand up and dance and walk around and grab an apple and get back in shape.
Thanks, everyone.